I want you to close your eyes for a second.
Yep.
Seriously, just for a moment. When I say the words nuclear power plant, what is the image that flashes into your brain?
I'm going to take a wild guess. A giant concrete dome.
Exactly. A big gray dome, maybe some of those hourglass-shaped cooling towers puffing out steam, and inside, a glowing blue pool of water with fuel rods sitting at the bottom.
Right.
That is the default mental model for almost everyone. It's what I like to call the Toyota Camry of nuclear power.
The light water reactor, which, to be fair, is a pretty safe assumption considering they make up the vast majority of the world's operating nuclear fleet. It is the standard for a reason.
It is. But today, we're going to break that model. We're going to completely shatter the idea that there's only one way to do this.
I like the sound of that.
We've got a source deck here, Lecture 03-3 to be specific, and it outlines what I'm calling the reactor multiverse. Because it turns out the world didn't just agree on one way to split the atom.
No, they definitely did not.
Different countries facing different constraints came up with wildly different engineering answers to the exact same physics problem.
And that really is the key theme of the documents we're diving into today. Engineering isn't about finding the single, perfect answer that works everywhere.
Right.
It's about trade-offs. You trade safety for cost, or efficiency for fuel independence, or complexity for raw power.
So in this deep dive, we're going to look at 3 specific timelines in this multiverse. We've got Canada, who decided to use heavy water. We've got the British, who decided to cool their reactors with, of all things, gas.
Yep.
And we've got the Soviet Union, who built a hybrid beast that eventually led to the worst nuclear accident in human history.
And finally, we'll look at where the industry's going next, which actually seems to be shrinking everything down.
Okay, so let's start with the physics puzzle itself, just so you, the listener, and all of us are on the exact same page. To get energy out of uranium, you need to split atoms.
Right.
You need neutrons flying around, hitting uranium atoms, and splitting them. But there's a catch.
There is a catch. The neutrons that come flying out of a split atom are moving way, way too fast. They are like a golf ball driven off a tee by a professional.
Okay.
If they're moving that fast, they'll just zip right past the other uranium atoms without hitting anything. You actually need to slow them down to increase the chance of a collision.
And the thing that slows them down is called a moderator.
Correct. In that Toyota Camry reactor, the standard light water reactor, we use regular tap water.
Right.
It does a great job of slowing neutrons down. But regular water has a bad habit. It's a bit of a thief. It actually absorbs some of those neutrons. It eats them.
Okay, so if the water is eating your neutrons, you need more neutrons to keep the chain reaction going, which means you need better fuel.
Exactly. You have to enrich the uranium. You have to process it in these massive industrial facilities to increase the concentration of the explodable stuff, uranium-235.
So that even if the water eats some neutrons, there are enough left over to hit targets. But enrichment is really expensive, right? I mean, it requires massive centrifuges, huge amounts of electricity, and just a lot of money. It is a massive barrier to entry.
It is. And that brings us to our first contender in the multiverse, Canada.
The notes label this the PHWR pressurized heavy water reactor. But the brand name is CANDU, which I've always loved. It sounds so optimistic. CANDU.
It stands for Canada Deuterium Uranium. The Canadians looked at that problem of expensive enrichment we just described and said, what if we didn't have to enrich the fuel at all?
Wow.
Yeah, what if we could just dig uranium out of the ground, process it minimally, and put it straight into the reactor?
That sounds like the absolute holy grail for a country with huge uranium mines, but no massive enrichment tech. But to do that, you need to stop the water from eating your neutrons.
Exactly. So instead of regular water, they decided to use heavy water.
This is where the lecture notes get really interesting. Because heavy water isn't just a metaphor or a brand name, it's physically different.
It is. Chemically, it's still H2O, but the hydrogen atoms in it are a heavier isotope called deuterium.
Okay.
Normal hydrogen just has one proton. Deuterium has a proton and a neutron. And because they already have that extra neutron, they don't want to steal yours. They just bounce the neutrons back without absorbing them.
So it's the perfect moderator. It slows the neutrons down, acts as the brake, but doesn't seal the fuel.
It is the most neutron-efficient moderator we have. And because it preserves so many neutrons, you can use natural, unenriched uranium. Though the notes do point out a little nuance, the most economical operation actually comes from using slightly enriched uranium, just around 1%.
Okay, let's unpack the design. Because looking at the diagrams in the lecture notes, this does not look like a normal reactor. A normal reactor is a big pot. This looks like a honeycomb.
A honeycomb is a great visualization. It's a large tank called a calandria, and it is penetrated by hundreds of horizontal tubes.
Pressure tubes.
Yes. In a normal reactor, the whole giant tank, the pot, is under immense pressure. That requires a massive, incredibly thick steel vessel that only a few countries can even manufacture.
Right. It's a huge industrial bottleneck.
Exactly. The CANDU avoids that entirely. The heavy water coolant just flows through these smaller individual pressure tubes.
So you don't need to forge one giant piece of steel. You just need lots of pipes. Which brings us to a huge operational advantage mentioned in the text. Refueling.
Right. If you have a big pot, like the standard design, you have to shut the reactor down completely, take the lid off, and shuffle the fuel.
And that takes a while.
It takes weeks, and you aren't making any electricity during that time. But with the CANDU pressure tubes, the machine keeps running.
How does that even work?
You use robots. One robot lashes onto one end of a tube, and another robot lashes onto the other end. The first robot pushes a new half-meter-long fuel bundle in, and the used one gets pushed out the other side into the waiting robot.
While it's running.
While it's running at full power. It's like gassing up your car while you're driving down the highway.
That is incredible for uptime. You just don't have those scheduled outages. But I am looking at the cons list here in the source, and it's not short. If heavy water is so magical, why doesn't everyone use it?
Because heavy water is excruciatingly expensive to make. You have to separate that special hydrogen isotope from regular water, and it is very rare. Filling a CANDU reactor with heavy water costs hundreds of millions of dollars just for the liquid.
So if you spring a leak,
you aren't just cleaning up a radioactive spill, you are literally watching your bank account drain onto the floor. Every drop costs money, and the regulation system is highly complex.
The notes also mention the thermal efficiency is lower, up to 30%. That seems low compared to other power plants.
It is. Because of the pressure limitations of those individual tubes, they can't run the water as hot as other designs. And in thermodynamics, heat is money. Lower heat means less efficient electricity generation.
Yes. So let's summarize the Canadian trade-off. You get fuel independence, you don't need expensive enrichment, but you pay a fraction for the heavy water, and you get less electricity per unit of heat.
That's the deal. And despite those cons, it's a success story. For countries like India, Pakistan, Argentina, South Korea, Romania, and China nations that wanted energy independence or didn't have enrichment capabilities, that was a trade they were willing to make. It accounts for about 11% of the world's reactors.
It's a very specific niche, but a highly successful one. Now let's hop across the pond to the UK. The lecture notes call this the GCR gas-cooled reactor. This feels like a completely different philosophy.
The British went their own way entirely. They looked at the moderator problem and said, we won't use water at all. We will use graphite.
Graphite, like giant blocks of pencil lead.
Essentially, yes. Imagine a massive carbon structure, a pile of carbon bricks. Graphite is a great moderator. It slows neutrons down, it captures very few of them, and crucially, it is structurally stable at high temperatures.
And for cooling, because they aren't using water there either.
No. They pump carbon dioxide gas CO2 through channels in the graphite to strip the heat away.
Gas cooling. My intuition says gas just isn't as good at carrying heat as water. Water is dense, it soaks up heat. Gas is airy.
You're right. Gas is a much worse heat conductor. To compensate, you have to pump a massive amount of it, and you have to run it at very high pressures. But the advantage is temperature. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, or roughly 300 under pressure. You're limited. Gas doesn't boil. You can get it much, much hotter.
How hot are we talking here?
Well, the early GCR designs ran at about 400 degrees Celsius, but the British iterated. They built the AGR, the Advanced Gas-Cooled Reactor. They used stainless steel cladding on the fuel and slightly enriched uranium, and pushed the temperatures up to 650 degrees Celsius.
650. That is double the temperature of a CANDU.
And in thermodynamics, temperature is king. The hotter your coolant, the more efficiency you can squeeze out of your turbines. The AGRs have incredible high thermal efficiency. That's the big win here. They are the sports cars of the industry.
But sports cars are high maintenance. The notes say the global share of this design is tiny, only about 3%. Basically just the UK. Why didn't it catch on?
It comes down to cost. Building a massive graphite core and a high-pressure gas system involves high investment costs and high operational costs compared to standard light water reactors. The economic hurdle was just too high for most.
They optimized for thermal efficiency, but lost on economic efficiency.
Exactly. Most of the world decided that a good enough water reactor that was cheaper to build was better than a high-performance gas reactor that broke the bank.
Okay, so we have the Canadian heavy lifter Rugged, runs on unenriched fuel. We have the British sports car, high performance, high cost. Now we get to the dark chapter of the multiverse, the Soviet Union, the RBMK.
This is where the tone really shifts. The Soviets wanted a reactor that could do everything. They wanted it to be massive, and they wanted it to be cheap to build using their existing factories.
The design is described in the sources as a hybrid. It uses graphite as a moderator, like the British, but light water as a coolant, like the standard boiling water reactors.
Right. It's officially called a light water graphite-moderated reactor, LWGR. Imagine a huge reactor core, a massive graphite structure pierced with pressure tubes filled with boiling water.
It sounds like they tried to take the best of both worlds.
They certainly took the scale. Because they used pressure tubes, they didn't need a giant pressure vessel. They could just keep adding tubes to make the reactor bigger and bigger.
But looking at the operational quirks found in the sources, there are some convenient but incredibly risky features. One bullet point just stops you in your tracks. No containment building.
That is a critical deviation from Western standards. In the West, we build a giant reinforced concrete dome over the reactor to keep radiation inside if something goes wrong. The RBMK did not have that.
And another quirk, refueling can happen while the reactor is operating.
Yes, similar to the CANDU in that regard, which is great for uptime but adds complexity.
And then there's the physics flaw. The source questions mention something called positive reactivity feedback. Let's unpack this physics problem. This seems to be the smoking gun.
It is. In a normal water reactor, water does two jobs. It cools the fuel, and it slows down the neutrons. If the water boils away into steam, you lose your moderator. The neutrons stop slowing down, and the nuclear reaction stops. It fails safe.
So, loss of water means the engine is off, the reaction slows down.
Correct. But in the RBMK, the graphite is the moderator. The graphite is solid, it's not going anywhere, the water is just the coolant. But remember earlier, we said regular light water also absorbs some neutrons.
Right, it eats them a little bit.
So in this design, if the water boils into steam, and steam is less dense than water, it absorbs fewer neutrons.
So fewer neutrons are being eaten.
Which means more neutrons are available to split atoms. The reaction actually increases, it gets stronger.
Which makes more heat.
Which boils more water into steam.
Which makes the reaction speed up even more.
Exactly. It makes reactivity control incredibly difficult compared to designs where boiling slows the reaction. It is a positive feedback loop. Instead of hitting the brakes, the reactor hits the gas.
That is terrifying. Why design it that way?
Because it allowed them to run massive plants efficiently and cheaply. They assumed operators would never let the reactor get into a state where that instability would take over.
And on April 26, 1986, at Chornobyl, that assumption failed.
That design flaw, the positive reactivity feedback, combined with operation at extremely low power and a complete lack of safety culture, caused the worst accident in the history. When they finally hit the emergency shutdown, the power spiked, the water flashed to steam, and the reactor blew apart.
The notes mention that post-accident modifications were made to the remaining RBMKs. They still make up about 3% of nuclear plants today.
They do. They modified the control rods and fuel to make the reaction more stable, but the fundamental hybrid design remains.
It's a sobering reminder that different isn't always better. Every choice impacts safety. Let's pivot to the final section of the lecture notes. We've looked at the massive giants of the past. Now the text points to a modern trend. Small and medium reactors, SMRs.
We are seeing a complete reversal in philosophy. For decades, the goal was scale, build a massive plant. Now the industry is saying the future is small, or at least flexible.
The definition here is pretty specific. Small is anything under 300 megawatts electric. Medium is 300 to 700 megawatts. So much smaller than a standard plant.
Right. And the idea isn't just to take a big reactor and shrink it, it's to redesign it.
The scale here is surprising. The notes highlight that there are already 131 of these units operating in 26 countries, totaling 59 gigawatts of capacity.
Yes, though that includes some older models and diverse applications. But the mission of these new designs is really what matters. Improved safety, security, non-proliferation, waste management, and better resource utilization.
It's about flexibility rather than just raw power. How does making it smaller achieve that?
When a reactor is small, you have less heat to deal with. You can rely on passive safety. You don't necessarily need massive electric pumps to cool the core in an accident. And you can build them in factories, completely changing the economics.
It really feels like the multiverse is converging. We recapped quite a journey today. From the heavy water fuel independence of the CANDU, to the high-efficiency gas designs of the UK, to the hard lessons learned from the graphite-water RBMK.
It's important for the listener to remember that there is no perfect reactor. There are only engineering choices. Every design solves one problem like fuel enrichment costs, but creates another like heavy water costs or safety stability.
There is a prompt in the notes for a group activity that I think serves as a perfect final provocative thought for you listening at home.
It's a great thought experiment. If you were designing a reactor today, knowing everything we just discussed, what would you prioritize?
Right. Would you prioritize the incredible thermal efficiency of the British gas-cooled designs, or the fuel independence of the Canadian CANDU?
Knowing that every single choice you make directly impacts the complexity of keeping the chain reactions safe.
Efficiency, independence, or safety. It's a massive puzzle. Something to mull over the next time you think about how we power the grid. That's it for this deep dive into the reactor multiverse. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.